Now, every group I've ever DM'd for in Dungeons and Dragons, there's always that one person that's like hyper committed to being sneaky boy. They are hell-bent on using stealth in every encounter, and they want to be that assassin, kind of a rogue-like person. So in this video, I wanted to unpack, okay, how does stealth actually work? Because the rules on it can be a little bit fuzzy at times, so we'll unpack everything you need to know about how to implement stealth into your gameplay, whether you're a rogue or something else, how sneak attack works, all that stuff. And this will also be helpful for you DMs out there who need to, maybe have a refresher on how to handle stealth in your encounters as well. My name's Ryan. Thanks so much for tuning into the video today. I appreciate each and every one of you. I am a DM for Dungeons and Dragons, and this channel is all dedicated to helping people understand Dungeons and Dragons better, whether you're a player or a DM, and we have a full playlist on how to play the game, and this will drop right into that playlist. So we'll hit a few different things in this video. We'll talk about how the hide mechanic works, that full action. We'll talk about how sneak attack works. We'll talk about disguise self. We'll talk about pass without trace. There's lots of different things that you can use to really lean into that reconnaissance kind of a style of gameplay in your campaigns. So let's get right into espionage by talking about the hide action first. So here are the official rules on hiding in D&D. They read, with the hide action, you try to conceal yourself. Now to do so, you must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity stealth check while you're heavily obscured or at least half of your body is covered. You must also be out of any enemy's line of sight. On a successful check, you have the invisible condition. Make note of your check's total, which is the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom, here perception, check. All right, so let's break this down one thing at a time. First, it says we need to pass a stealth check of 15. So if you want to hide, you'll need to roll the d20 and then add your stealth modifier to your total. Let's say you're a rogue and your stealth modifier is +5. All you need to do is roll a 10 or higher to successfully hide, provided that you meet the other conditions for hiding. So what are those other conditions? Well, let me be clear. I've had players try to hide in the middle of a lit room while standing behind no cover whatsoever. That doesn't work, okay? It doesn't matter how stealthy you are. If you're standing in the middle of an empty room in full light, I'm gonna see you. The rules state that you must be either heavily obscured or half of your body needs to be behind cover. Let's start with heavily obscured. So in order to be heavily obscured, you need to be standing in the midst of an environmental condition that makes you hard to see. Now, these could include things like darkness, right? You could be standing just in a dark room, you're heavily obscured. They could also include heavy fog or dense foliage. And if you're ever confused about the environmental conditions, just ask your DM if hiding is possible in your current context. They'll be happy to fill you in. There are some other environmental conditions that are described as somewhat or lightly obscured, in which case you would need a special exception to be able to hide without cover. The other condition that you need to meet if you're not heavily obscured, the other option is that at least half of your body needs to be obscured by some form of physical cover, right? You could hide behind a box or a tree or a bush, provided at least half of your body is behind that object from your enemy's perspective. Assume that your enemies have a hive mind, and that if one of them can see you, then they are all aware of you, right? So if you're obscured for two of them, but a third one can see you very clearly, then you cannot hide because that third enemy can see you and simply tell the others where you are. If your DM doesn't have physical maps for you to look at, you can always ask them before you move if there is any physical cover around that you could move to if your intention is to hide. They should be able to guide you. So I'll actually show you a little bit of Baldur's Gate 3 gameplay from time to time in this video because I think that it's really helpful as a visual aid to understand how stealth works. You can see in this clip here that I'm standing in direct light. And if I try to use the hide action, it tells me that you see this little sun icon, it's full. You're in full light, man, that ain't gonna work. But then if I step over into this shaded space, you can see that the sun kind of goes down to a half sun, which means that this is a shaded area. So stealth is possible there, but I will have to roll positively for a stealth check, and then they can still roll to discover me is still an option. So to summarize the hiding action, you need to roll a stealth check and beat a 15, provided you are obscured heavily by physical cover or by an environmental condition. But what about during combat? Can you just up and hide in the middle of combat? The answer is yes, but you have to remember that hiding is an action and you still have to meet certain conditions. So I've DM'd for lots of groups before where players will say at the end of their turn, after they've, done an attack, they'll say, okay, well, then I crouch down behind the box so they can't shoot me. Unfortunately, this is not a thing. You can't just crouch for free and avoid enemy fire. I always remind players that they are allowed to go prone and drop to the floor, but that doesn't just hide them behind cover for free unless their movement takes them to a place where they are fully obscured while standing, like if they go on the other side of a doorway to stand behind a tree. Going prone can be helpful. It doesn't make you invisible, but it does make all ranged attacks against you have disadvantage since there's less surface area to shoot. But the trade-off is that any enemy who runs up to you while you're prone will have an advantage on melee attacks instead. So it's a bit of a give and take. So there's no free hide action in combat. So if a player does want to hide on their turn, they certainly can try to roll for stealth, but it will cost them their action. The good news is that if you want to play as a stealthy character, you can choose to be a rogue. After just one level up at level 2, rogues can hide and dash and disengage as a bonus action. It's like a cunning action. This means they can attack and hide in the same turn. That's one of the great advantages of the rogue. Here's a quick example of a time where in Baldur's Gate 3, I'm a rogue. I go to an obscured area that's in the shade. This is a little bit of a shadowed area here. I crouch down and use my bonus hide action. That gives me access to a sneak attack, and then I can do the sneak attack on the guy that's right next to me because I am hidden. Now let's talk briefly about stealth outside of combat. Sometimes your party will be behind enemy lines, or you'll be trying to infiltrate some place that you're not allowed to be. You're probably going to want to wait until night, or make sure that the conditions are dark so that you can hide it all, and then you've got some choices. You could just send your sneaky players forward and have them hide and scope out the place, or you could do a group stealth check. So in order to pass a group stealth check, everyone would roll their own individual stealth check. And if at least half of the party passes, then everybody passes. But if someone fails critically by rolling a 1, that actually counts as 2 failures for the party. While you're moving around in stealth, you'll have to avoid enemy sightlines still and remain in places that are obscured. Some DMs will also roll for perception checks for their enemy combatants to see if they can perceive you in spite of your hiding, but that's entirely up to their discretion. Otherwise, they'll probably just use their passive perception. Feel free to ask them in advance how they handle stealth. The next thing we got to cover is sneak attacks. This is another thing that's really simple, but still commonly misunderstood. I'll actually use a little Baldur's Gate gameplay here to explain this, as I think the visuals are super helpful. First, what is a sneak attack? Well, forget what you think that you know based on other games and video games. A sneak attack is a specific type of attack that a rogue can use, and only a rogue. If you're a different class, it ain't happening. You have other options that we'll get to in a minute, but first, let's talk about the rogue. At level 1, rogues can use sneak attack. It's a core part of the rogue kit. The ability reads as follows. Once per turn, you can deal an extra d6 of damage to one creature that you hit with an attack roll if you have advantage on the roll, and the attack uses a finesse or a ranged weapon. The extra damage's type matches the weapon's type that you're using, but you don't need advantage on the attack roll if at least one of your allies is within 5 feet of the target, as long as you don't have disadvantage on the roll. So as per usual, the rulebook has a wall of text that we need to decipher. So if you're a rogue and you want to perform a sneak attack, just know this. A sneak attack allows you to add 1d6 to your damage roll if you hit the attack. You'll get more d6 damage die as you level up. The second thing that you have to know is that you need to either have advantage on the roll or you need to have an ally standing next to the enemy. For example, here, I cannot use my sneak attack on this guy. I'm standing right next to him. I don't have anything that's giving me an advantage on the attack, so I can't use it. But if I were to move an ally up in direct competition with this person, I can treat them as a distraction, and then I can use my sneak attack and get extra damage. Now, there are lots of other ways to get advantage on an attack. It could be a height advantage if you're using a ranged weapon. An ally could knock an enemy prone. That would give you an advantage on your melee attacks. And so if for any reason you have advantage on your attack, you can use the sneak attack feature. So one of the best things you can do as a rogue is actually communicate with your teammates that you get to do extra damage if they can serve as a distraction of any kind. So a lot of times you're going to want to be kind of focusing down big enemies. Your tanky people are actually actively engaged with. So if your tank, your warrior, your fighter, your Goliath or whatever, let's say they run up to an enemy, now they are providing an opportunity for you to do extra damage to that enemy by being right next to them. But here's the interesting thing about sneak attack. It says once per turn, not once per round. So in theory, if the conditions are met, you could actually apply sneak attack to an opportunity attack or a ready to attack later in that same round and do more than one sneak attack per round. Isn't that crazy? So long as you don't do more than one on any single character's turn, you can do more than one in a round. But as always, it's on you, the player, to understand how your abilities and actions work and inform your DM of your intentions and plans when the conditions for those attacks are met. They won't do it for you. They're busy handling all the enemy combatants, the status effects, the initiative orders, the environmental hazards. So make sure you know how your attacks work so you can let them know when it's time for your character to do something badass. Okay, let's move off rogues and back to the whole party. There are other ways to be stealthy and benefit from it in combat. One such way is by leveraging the surprise function. If you were able to get the drop on an enemy or a group of enemies, you can catch them fully off guard and get a huge boon in combat. This is a condition we call surprise. When you surprise an enemy, they cannot move or take an action or reaction on their first turn. Once their turn has ended, they can now take reactions, but they won't be able to act until their next turn. I still see DMs get this wrong, but you don't actually get an attack advantage against surprised enemies. You get a free turn against them. In order to gain the surprise condition, though, you need to initiate combat with a sudden attack while you are hidden from enemy sight. So you may approach a group of enemies while stealth. You'll have to roll higher than the enemy's passive perception value in order to do so, but if an enemy notices your barbarian party member, they are fully aware of danger and you roll for initiative right then and there. Even so, surprise is quite useful as you essentially get a free turn against the enemies who are surprised. So as we approach the end of the video, let's talk about a couple of other ways to be sneaky. One is the spell Pass Without Trace, which is available for druids and rangers. It reads, you radiate a concealing aura in a 30-foot emanation for the duration. While in the area, you and each creature you choose have a +10 bonus to stealth checks and leave no tracks. So this spell, it's got a 30-foot radius around the player who casts it. It's a concentration spell, and it has a full 1 hour game time duration, which is pretty huge. This is an extremely useful spell for exploration and clandestine actions for the team. But just remember, you got to stay within that 30-foot radius of the person who's concentrating on that spell. You can't like fan out and all surround the enemy. If you do that and you separate, then you guys are going to have to start rolling for your own stealth checks. Then you have another ability called Disguise Self, which is available to the Bard, the Wizard, and the Sorcerer classes. It reads, make yourself, including your clothing and armor and weapons, look different until the spell ends. You can look up to 1 foot taller or 1 foot shorter, and must don a disguise that has the same general humanoid shape as you. This is another great stealth alternative, and the cool thing about it is that you can get this at level 1. So if you want to be able to pass through security checkpoints, gain access to restricted areas, or enter a building you've been banned from occupying, then you could simply make yourself look like someone who does belong. The disguise lasts for an hour of game time, so you can get a lot of use out of it, provided you don't do anything reckless to provoke someone to come and investigate you. Alright, that is the skinny on stealth in D&D. Stealth isn't an easy thing to pull off unless you are specifically talented and skilled in stealth in the game. So if stealth is the way that you want to handle things, you're going to have to plan ahead for the way that you want to build your character out. And make sure that you understand the conditions that need to be met for you to pass without being detected in the world of D&D. Thank you so much for tuning into the video today. If you found it helpful, would you let me know by leaving a like on the video, as that's the best free way to support the content right here on YouTube, and consider subscribing for additional D&D content. Polite reminder, we do have a fresh campaign coming up with a brand new world we created, brand new big map, cities, locations, characters, NPCs, everything. A lot of the art is already underway, so I'll be posting some lore videos to kind of get you acclimated to the realm ahead of time. If you want to help support the artwork that we're having commissioned for this campaign, you can feel free to join the Patreon group down below. There's a link in the description, and there's a $6 tier there, and all of that money goes directly to funding and paying the artists who are doing the work for our campaign. And with that, I say be warm and well fed, my friends, and hope to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.